secret tunnel. Yeah.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the Artenders with Mac and Danny. Today we're going to be reviewing Avatar: The Last Airbender Book 2. We just did Book 1 2 weeks ago, where we had some pretty good conversation. We a quick recap of that. Basically, we talked about how maybe there was a different version of Avatar: The Last Airbender where Zuko is the protagonist. That would be pretty sick. But of course, that would have to come with an entirely different episode structure. We talked about Appa. We talked about what's that? Admiral Zhao.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, I love Zhao.
Yeah. And the fact that I guess we'd never really see him ever again. Which I'm sure is a big upset to you.
It is. And so really fast, there's one episode in this second season where he's referenced by a character, and in that moment I was like, man, I wish we got more Zhao.
Missed potential. Now,
exactly.
I want to start this off with just the most simple question, the most straightforward question. Danny, did you like Book 2 more than Book 1?
Easily.
Yes. I mean, there's just no comparison, right? It's like such a step up.
I think when looking at the episode list again, I think Book 2 has a funky start.
Yeah.
I think the first few episodes aren't that good, really. But in terms of sort of payoff, for what characters introduced in the first season, tremendous payoff here, and in a lot of cases, seeing characters again that I fully expected not to see. Because a lot of shows with this sort of structure that, as we discussed in our first discussion, this show does a delicate balance between having a plot progression and having an episode progression, at the same time. Like, an episode has its own plot, but it's still deeply influential towards the entire narrative of the show. So I was fully expecting characters like Suki and Jet to just never be seen again, and I was completely wrong in that regard. So even
They really
though
wrap back around, huh?
Yes, and even though, like I said, this season starts off rocky, it definitely delivers. If we were to use a baseball analogy, I would say, it's a good double, it's a good triple, definitely bringing in an RBI or two. I would not give it a home run. It's not there, but it's a good hit. It's a good, nice hit.
Oh yeah, for sure. We have trudged down the field and got ourselves a field goal. No touchdowns, no game winners, but we're definitely making progress. Big time progress. Can we agree that after episode 6, The Blind Bandit, we meet Toph, we meet Toph's bounty hunters, we meet all of the Earth fighters and whatnot, that pretty much after that, the series and the season just takes off.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's interesting because part of me thinks that might just be a coincidence that they started, like the story just started getting a little more interesting at that point. But part of me is like, maybe it's not a coincidence that Toph really does introduce some very interesting things to the show. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I kind of. I think she's a very funny, very very cool character to be around, and she's like, it's this interesting blend of being really, really serious, but also just comedic at the same time. Partly because she's just kind of mean here and there. She's just mean. But right. I think that's a great sort of foil to the group that Aang is super kind. Katara is also really kind. I mean, Sokka is just a dope. But Toph is not a bad individual, of course, but it's funny to have this sort of to crassly say an asshole.
Yeah.
In the group.
I think there might be something to the idea that she does raise the stakes. There's always more conflict with Toph around. There's always there's now not just one or two villains. We now have 3 or 4 parties of villains always after them at any given time, because we have someone going after Toph specifically. We have 2 people going after Aang. So there's definitely an up in stakes there. But also, I think what's interesting is that even whenever the group is by themselves, even whenever the group is not actually fighting a bad guy, there's still conflict within the group now, which I think is was the huge win whenever Toph is introduced to the mix.
And it makes perfect sense, because it takes a few episodes for Toph to really gel with the group. There's a lot of resistance with her and who she is and how the rest of the group operates. So it's you don't realize it, I guess. Like, if all of a sudden, let's say, I mean, this character was introduced and she just got along with the group and everything was, hunky-dory, you wouldn't probably realize it. But because there are some growing pains with the relationship between her and the group, it provides a lot more texture to their relationship, and it makes it noticeable, and it makes sense totally that, like, oh yeah, of course, like, this is going to take time for them to, like, actually be friends, and by the end of the season they very much so are, but it's a very nice and steady progression.
She also opens up a lot of really interesting things that weren't really explored before, because before it was really just like the only 2 people that were really friends at all and that we really knew about their relationship was Katara and Aang. But now it's interesting because Katara is now fighting Toph a little bit more, so now so then you were able to see all of a sudden, like, Sokka and Aang are a lot closer. Sokka and Momo, Sokka and Appa, Aang to all the animals and everything, Aang to Toph. Like, there's just so many individual relationships to explore that there's really a lot to engage with at all times. And another thing that's really interesting is, I think that Toph is the best fighter out of all of that group of people. I think that at this point, at least, I think that she could probably take really any of them. So it leads me to my next question, which is, because I was thinking about, like, if we were to make, like, a Smash Brothers type tournament of all of the fighters in the show, who would come out on top, and it would really come down to Azula and Toph, I think. Who do you think would win in a 1v1 Azula Toph?
So we're counting the antagonists as well, like, in this conversation?
Oh yeah.
Shoot.
We learned a lot about, well, and Iroh doesn't count because I don't know, that just feels wrong.
Yeah, I feel like Iroh, it'd be a crime if Iroh didn't win, but if Iroh didn't win, it's purely because of his old age, you know?
Yeah.
But in terms of the best fighter on the show, I mean, yeah, probably Toph, if not Aang. I would put Azula third. I also find it comedic that we're making, like, a tier list of who's the best fighter, This is this is like sports talk radio, like, you gotta rank the teams. So I don't think it's between Azula and Toph. I think it's between Aang and Toph. Because I think Azula is definitely up there, but every single time Azula was, I think, when Azula was, like, in a fight with these individuals, there was always another variable, right? Like Azula was never on completely even ground with Aang. Let's use the episode of the drill, for example, right? When they fight on top of the drill, there's this variable like the falling rocks and, like, the drill breaking, and so I think Aang could have won that fight, and very, very closely. Another case of, like, Azula besting Katara and Aang at the end of the season, but you also got to remember that she had Zuko and a bunch of other Earthbenders helping her. So I think just, like, raw talent and raw power. I can't believe this discussion.
I love it.
I think Aang is above Azula at the very least. I think Toph is definitely up there too. So at the end of the season, I think Toph. And here's why. And I'm going to talk about, in my opinion, the one of, if not the dopest moment in this season. It is when Toph learns to metal bend.
It's so sick, right? Oh, it's so sick.
It's great, and it makes sense because of course like Toph would be able to, because that's how she quote unquote sees like Daredevil.
Right.
She's able to see the earth in the metal, so she's able to bend the metal with the earth inside of it.
Incredible.
And so I think that puts Toph a notch above Aang in his non-Avatar state.
Mm-hmm. There's something really interesting and cool that the show does that I want so bad to touch on. At the beginning and end of every season, except for the very beginning of the first season, the very beginning and end of every season, and they do this in Legend of Korra too, they introduce you to a new style of bending, like a new extension of bending. So I think at the end of the first season it was water healing, right? And then
right,
because you're like, oh, I didn't think they could like heal people with water. That's cool. And then there's lightning. Yeah, there's lightning
at
bending
the very beginning of the season.
Yeah,
and then the metal bending much later on. Yes, I think in the last, if not the second to last episode.
Yeah, and then also Aang starts like doing his like diamond thing, which is so freaking cool. Okay, yeah, that's just okay. I might have to get into my sizzle surf here. Okay, should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think the last fight of the season. The very, very end of the season.
Yes.
That 10-minute fight.
Yes.
I do think that's pretty much the best single fight in any TV show, any movie, anything I've ever seen. I've never seen a fight that's better than that, period. That's my fucking sizzle serve.
How does it feel to be wrong?
Fuck you. So this is why. It's not even just that it's like, oh man, what a cool fight, because it's not really even that. It's not really even that. Like, it's a pretty good fight, but it's not even that. It is that, oh, I could debate this for so long. There's a 3-act structure that Avatar submits to, that it's like, we're definitely going with this, right? And it's not just like the 3-act structure of the episodes. It's not just the 3-act structure of the seasons, or like every single scene has a 3-act structure. Every single moment has a 3-act structure. That's they're obsessed with it, right? Tales of Ba Sing Se. Every single story 3-act structure. And this fight 3-act structure, which is dope as shit. Something that also comes into play is there's not a single move that they use the entire fight that we've seen before. Like, we see all new moves the whole fight. Katara whips out her little, water arms that we're haven't seen that shit before.
Those were referenced. I have to say, we never saw them in action, but those were referenced.
Okay. Oh,
that
because
she was teaching Aang them. Because I remember, because it was called, the octopus arms, and I thought that was the funniest and coolest thing.
And also, though, that she, stood in a circle, she made a circle of the waves and fought, 20 people at once.
Yeah.
And then the lightning, obviously, he makes a suit of armor and looks like what is it, Astro Boy? And in his little diamond thing.
Yeah.
Oh man. There's just right. And there's just
there's a lot going on in that fight.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And it transcends. It's not just about beating a person. He has to then give up his love for Katara in order to get into the Avatar state, and then once he's in the Avatar state, he might be dead. Oh my gosh, it's just so dramatic and juicy and just excellent. And what a fucking twist with the Iroh. There's just so much there, Danny. There's just so much there.
I agree. When you're saying that there's so much there, when you're saying it's an excellent fight, so far I would probably put that as number one fight in the series. There isn't another one that really comes to mind that's a more impressive one, because every other one is dealt with very quickly in some manner in order to progress the story. But this one takes the opportunity to tell the story in the fight, more so than others.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, you saying that this is the best fight in the medium? in viewing medium is an absurd take, you should feel bad because that's absurd. That's ridiculous. Do you hear yourself?
I'm gonna need a counter argument, Danny. I'm gonna need a counter argument. Man.
The big counter argument that came to my mind, because your big thing that you're referencing to is a sort of payoff, right? Is a narrative payoff in this fight.
Every move is in order to fuel the story.
So when we look at a movie like Avengers Endgame, and you're gonna tell me, spoiler alert,
that's pretty good shit,
that when Cap picks up the hammer, I mean, what more needs to be said? First of all, I mean, absolutely absurd. And I'm going to admit it right now. And I know I need to. And at one point, I think for this podcast that we're going to view them. But the Rocky movies, right? From what I understand, Rocky versus Ivan Drago, my God. All right? And that's not even mentioning the Predator.
Okay, this is the first valid one
the showdown.
that you've given me.
The showdown between Mr. Schwarzenegger and the Predator. I mean,
I will say,
but to go so far as to say as this is the best fight ever, and I'm not even referencing I'm not even referencing the choreography shown in like Jackie Chan, in Bruce Lee, even like Donnie Yen films. Like I'm not even like referencing that. So to go so far as to say that this is the best one, I think it's very, very good. Don't get me wrong. And you're lucky because I wish I had more notes under my belt in this regard, but I highly disagree with you, my friend.
So do I care more about this fight than any other fight? Not necessarily. Do I think that it's the best fight choreography? Not even remotely close. Do I think
so? What makes it the best fight?
It is the most perfect storytelling fight that I've ever seen. You can tell stories in many different ways, but in terms of the actual stories that are being told through all the fights that you just mentioned, the fights only have to be so long to tell the stories that you were talking about. This story had to be told over 10 minutes of fighting, and every twist and turn was worth it. Every twist and turn was just like surprise after surprise after twist and turn. It was just so beautiful.
Kill Bill.
Oh, where she with like the 100 guys, whatever.
The Crazy 88.
Crazy 88. You got me. Yeah. That was pretty good. You know what? The only counter argument I'm willing to accept is the fight in Predator whenever Arnold Schwarzenegger and his
The
friend
Bourne Ultimatum.
and that's a good one too. Whenever they have the arm wrestling handshake.
Arm wrestling. The best moment in the film. All right, listen. I'm going to make the executive decision. We are going to break. You're going to hear from our sponsor, and during this break, Mac is going to watch a scene, and we're going to see if, in some regard, without even knowing the proper context, if this is going to change his mind. Thank you.
All right, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Now, just let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second of all, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch more. And third, now this is really important, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hear me when I say no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from our break to the Artenders. During this break, I showed Mac here a clip of the hallway fight scene from Old Boy. If you haven't seen it, I would suggest pausing this right now just to check out that fight scene. Because it's regarded up there as one of, if not the best fight scene to exist. But Mac was making the conversation here that the final fight between Aang Katara versus Azula and then Zuko at the end of Book 2 is the best fight scene. Now, I haven't gotten Mac's opinions on the Old Boy hallway fight, but Mac, what'd you
I'm gonna
think?
start off by saying I think that we're the only podcast on the internet that fully supports people leaving our podcast mid-podcast. And I like that. I hope that we keep that up. That makes me kind of happy. But I love it.
What an
But
audience.
The old boy fight was really epic. Was huge. Was very grand. The fight choreography was fantastic. The whole one-shot thing was insane. Just the premise of it was wild. And it was nice to see that character overcome that obstacle. But I didn't necessarily need the whole fight for storytelling purposes. I didn't need all. It was just cool to see.
Mind you, you didn't have the context. Neither do I, honestly. So we can't really discuss there. But
You got me.
it is important to take into account the context and the stakes when looking at a fight scene, because it adds a lot more.
But that is what makes this fight scene at the end of book 2 such a fantastic fight scene. Is the context, is that it's not as much that this was a fight scene because fight scenes are cool. It was a fight scene, and every fight that was had and everything that happened was just the most effective and most fantastic way that they could have told every individual story point that they did. But anyway, that was my sizzle serve. What is yours?
I'll give the fight at the end of book 2. It's insanely creative, and it's because they're not bound by human anatomy. They could just, it's animation in a fantastical world. They can do as they please.
Sure.
And that's
By human anatomy.
well, I want to make that point clear that that's an important piece of information to consider when looking at this fight scene, that it's only bound by, for the most part, by creativity, as opposed to
and human anatomy.
Yeah, and
like Zuko's dick is not going to get in the way.
Yes.
His massive throbbing dick
What's
is
wrong
not gonna
with
get in
you?
the way of his fight. Whenever you say human anatomy, it's the first thing in my mind.
That's
goes to.
not
It's
on me.
I was just like, human anatomy.
My sizzle serve.
That's fine. Anyway.
Azula is not that good of a character.
You know what? I'm right there to fuck with you. I'm right there with you.
And I think I was thinking, I was racking my brains, as one would say, as to why I didn't care for Azula's character, nor her posse, which consisted of
May and Ty Lee,
I
right?
forgot her name.
May.
Is it May or Mai? It's one of those. And Ty Lee. And I think the big thing that made Azula so not that compelling is because of that. She was not compelling. The one thing that Azula was missing is a sort of humanity, or at least a sort of sympathy, right? And so, does every character need that? No. Does every antagonist need that? No. But I also feel like if you're going to make this character is such a big deal, and we're constantly going to see this character, and it's not the case like Fire Lord Ozai. That Fire Lord Ozai right now, that character is more of an ideal. It's supposed to embody a sort of evil, unknown presence, right? But if you're going to give us a character that is constantly on the tail of our main characters, basically filling in the role for Zuko of last season, you need to flesh her out at least a little bit, in terms of what's at stake for her. What is she losing? What is she in this for? How important is this to her? What does this mean? We don't know what her sort of POV on the world. Well, I guess we do know her POV. She just wants to dominate.
But that's kind of boring.
But what exactly does that give her, right? I'm not saying we have to agree with her. I'm never in that camp, right? But a character is so much more interesting if we, at the bare minimum, understand what they're going for and maybe sympathize here and there. Your thoughts?
I'm really glad that you had that observation and that you feel the way that you do, because they really touch on that in the third season. In the third season, yeah,
Thank
you
God.
really get into, and it's not as much that they like justify it, or that they really dive all that deeper into her humanity or whatever. They actually dive more into her absence of humanity. And because I think that they had two choices, which was she could have been like a good person. She could have been a good person in a former life, and then she has turned into this evil thing, or she's just always been just flat out evil. And I think that what they
and this season sort of like kind of implies, at least to me, this is my first time watching it, that she's always been not nice.
Yes, and they really touch on that in the third season, and in very funny ways too. And yeah, and I think it actually ends up being kind of interesting, because what she represents isn't actually, I think what she ends up representing isn't actually just this like essence of evil, like I'm just a bad person to be bad type thing. I think that she ends up representing something a lot more, but in being a representation of something, she loses a lot of life, a lot of actual character. Yeah. Absolutely.
I even wrote down, do we need her?
Yeah.
The answer to that question is, I think yes.
We need someone to fill
I
that
think
spot.
what that character, right? I think what that character serves is great, because it does heighten the stakes for all the main characters. But much like Zhao, I'm not gonna lie, she could have used more love, and I think so. The issue with Zhao was I felt that he didn't get enough screen time. While the issue with Azula is that she got too much screen time for the character that she is.
Yeah.
That if they were going to give her that much screen time, show some growth in some sort of regard. Even if it's a growth towards her sort of antagonistic attitude, at least give us a little bit of something to hang on to, right? We had that with a lot of characters, at the bare minimum. We got some growth with Zhao, that like he was getting excited about like conquering, right? And we got a little bit of character with his former teacher Zhang that he was like his greatest student or something along those lines, but Zhao was the one that had him stop teaching. It's something like that, right? Where I feel like we're missing wholeheartedly with Azula, and then we just have these two random characters with her, which are they're fun characters, but it's just like these feel like characters right here. These three characters,
Mei Tai Li and Azula.
Say what?
Mei Tai Li and Azula.
Yeah. They are only, unfortunately, and I wish this wasn't the case, because in my opinion, plot devices in a sort of way to raise the stakes for the main characters, to always have them on the run. They can never really stay in one place, which is why I think the episode The Chase is one of, if not the best episode in the season.
I was about to ask about that. I was about to ask about your favorite episode. That's interesting.
But so I think her character serves a great purpose, but there's very little, if any, actual character there, which is just disappointing, because I feel like the sort of relationship that she has, that she's Zuko's sister, younger sister, and sort of like the right-hand woman for the Fire Lord, it seems like, always, didn't care much for Iroh. And so also, what does chasing the Avatar mean to her? We had a lot of potential, and that potential wasn't explored, so it was frustrating, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. You said The Chase was your favorite episode.
Yes.
That is so interesting. That's the one where they are on the lizards and they're coming after.
Correct. And
constantly. Okay, yeah.
And every time they touch down with Appa, they're chased off.
Yeah, they're closer. Right. Interesting. That was your favorite episode. Wow.
Because of the amount of conflict in that episode.
Okay, sure.
So what
and also, that's the first confrontation that Aang and Azula have.
Correct. So I mean, what we had in that episode was a lot of conflicts between Toph and the group. We had this sort of variable that the group is always exhausted. And I don't know why, but I love circumstances where a character is exhausted because that leads them to, like, dire circumstances. It really pushes them towards, like, a different direction. So we got that. So then we also have Toph.
That's you as an actor, too, though.
Yeah.
You're like, I love to be in circumstances where I'm just tired.
Yeah, but like tired, like exhaustion from just this overexerting because they need to, right? Like that's the need. And then we get Toph meeting Iroh, and then there's growth between Toph and Iroh as characters and what they learn individually. We get some Zuko progression as well, and how the episode ends is brilliant. That they all square off against Zula, which is such a first of all a cool moment, but then she does a very clever thing of zapping, I guess, of hitting Iroh with some firebending to and then escaping, right? And then what does that do for Zuko and kind of by extension the rest of the group, particularly Katara's relationship and even Toph's relationship.
And that's definitely what I was about to say in terms of the
there's a lot that happens in that episode.
Yeah. What Azula ends up being, that I think it's important that it was Azula and no one else, like why it was important that she was the bad guy and no one else, is that the way they set her up, she is extremely important for obviously Zuko's arc, for Iroh's arc, but also Katara's arc. And yeah, so I'm excited to see what you think there. There was like 3 episodes that I was thinking of that were all like some of my favorites, and The Chase was not up there for me, which is funny. And it's not that it was bad; it was fantastic. It's a fantastic episode, but that just wasn't like a standout for me. That wasn't something that like was unforgettable.
When I was looking at the episode list, I was like, "This is the most like one of the high stakes for the individual characters." Right? We look at something like the drill, and the drill is insanely high stakes because a drill is puncturing the greatest city of the Earth Kingdom, the Earth Kingdom capital, right? So it's major sort of implications for what that could do to the world, but at a very individual character level, I think The Chase is great. Yeah. But what were the episodes that you were thinking?
I was thinking that Tales of Ba Sing Se is one of them. Not like it's like the best, but it's just something that was like memorable because that was the very first time that like I had a real emotional connection to any character, which is funny. Like, the very first time that I actually cared enough to be like, oh, damn, I'm really sad about this, or really excited. Very first emotional connection that I ever had in the entire series was seeing Uncle Iroh and at his son's grave. Like, that was such a, I don't know, that was the very first time that I was like, oh, wait, I really care about this show. That... Blind Bandit was pretty good. I think that the biggest one I think maybe for me was Guru, which was I think episode 19, like the first part.
Yeah, it's the second to last episode when they all separate.
Yeah. I love learning about the world. You know that. Like I think that's the strong point of the show, but specifically the way that you learn about it through the Guru and Aang realizing like what he must do and everything, and like I think that's I mean that sets up the turning point.
It's a very big episode for Aang, and also a relatively big episode for Sokka as well, I would say.
Yeah. And Sokka is becoming slowly but surely more and more important and more interesting, which I did not expect, but it is what it is.
As opposed to just being the fool. Yeah.
Right. He's actually doing something now. Yeah. Do you have a gold medal, sir?
Of course I do. This gold medal is a little bit different. Once again, because it's actually, this gold medal is because of what this character does to other characters. And when you hear me say this name, you're going to be like, I cannot believe you. Not from a disappointment level, but a sort of like, you. My gold medal is to Appa.
You little fucker! Oh my...
So this is why Appa's my gold medal.
Well, you were
Because,
so
first of
mad
all,
about me making up a gold medal last time.
Because I want to make it very clear. I want to make it very, very, very clear.
Oh, your sultry voice, Danny.
Appa.
Don't you dare tease me like that.
Appa. In the first season. Not that interesting. The issue with Appa was just a sort of plot device. Appa was only a vehicle, right? They needed the characters to get somewhere quickly. That's why they got Appa. They wrote the fights in such a way here and there to have Appa as a sort of Deus Ex Machina. But theoretically, they never needed that Deus Ex Machina. So Appa, really, in the first season, is just a means of transportation. Now, what this season does, that I think does a very, very good job for a good, like, quarter, third-ish of the season, the group is without Appa. What does that mean? That means the group loses a tool that they have. So they have to be a little bit more creative. That means the stakes are a little bit higher for them. They have to figure things out differently, and they have to try, in using the bare minimum of words, excuse me, they have to try more. They have to really push themselves a lot more than they are used to. That's a good thing. We also had, because of that, an entire episode dedicated to Appa and where he was and what he was doing during that time. So we actually got more character of Appa, and it was cleverly done, because like there are only so many ways that like Appa can give us character, right? So that's why we had the Guru, for example, saying things, you're still full of love, but you felt a lot of betrayal. You're full of a lot of fear right now. Like those sort of like nuance, I guess, sort of displays could be more easily told through another character. And we still got instances where, oh my gosh, like clearly Appa is just like on his last string right now, you know? So we got a lot of good instances of that episode for that character. Unfortunately, when Appa comes back to the group, of course it's like a very like great moment, and then Appa is right back to his role of just being a vehicle. But I'm giving him the gold medal because of it's funny, because of what the removal of that character does for the narrative of the show.
I totally agree, Danny. I totally agree. That's not where my gold medal is going.
Is that your gold medal as well?
That's not that's not where my gold medal is going. But I agree that Appa is such a kick-ass character in this series, in this season, in this book. Mine is going to go to actually it's going to go to Uncle Iroh this time. Which seems like a pretty easy one, which seems like a pretty simple one. Okay. But specifically because, well, first of all, the two most important fights, the two ones where Aang was in the most danger in the season were, at least in my opinion, whenever he faces Azula in the town, and whenever he faces Zuko and Azula at the very end of the season. Both times he was saved by Uncle Iroh, which I think is huge. Yeah. But also specifically, I love the way that they have painted Uncle Iroh in terms of his ability to control conflict, his ability to confront conflict, his ability to talk with people he doesn't agree with, and like try and change Zuko's mind through love and compassion and understanding. And that he's like, I'm going to make sure that you turn into the man that you're supposed to be, and I'm only going to do it by being there whenever you need me to be there, and just trying to be like a light in your life in some way. That's just fucking adorable to me.
I think also,
and I think that
I think also this season does a good job of we get a hint, we get a little of it, where we can see how and why Iroh got to this place in his life.
Yeah.
Which is super important. Because if you look at like the original heir, you know, to the Fire Lord before his brother took it, Ozai, it really begs the question, how the hell did he get here? But like we're given little pieces here and there, like, okay, this this is starting to make sense. And it's not like we have an episode. And it's great because we don't have an episode actually dedicated to Iroh. It's just here and there, here and there, here and there, here and there.
Yeah, and I don't think that we ever totally get one, which I think is a fucking shame. I want a lot more.
Yeah, I think that episode would be fantastic. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I think that would probably be the best episode of the season of the series.
I agree.
But it's the storytelling is done very well. And it goes to show because he doesn't have his own episode because he doesn't need it.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mr. Danny LaVille.
Yeah.
What are we watching next week?
So we're not watching.
Or consuming. Ooh, yeah. I'm excited.
We're not necessarily watching next week. We're going to play something. This is a game. Yes, a game that I want to play
Danny.
for a while. I want to make sure it was something easily accessible. And I found it. And luckily it was. But yes, like I said, I want to play it for a while. It's on the App Store. It's not necessarily it's kind of, but it isn't a sort of text adventure. But it's one of those games that your decisions and the decisions that you make influence the path and the story that you are on. It is a game.
That is so sick.
It is a game called Oxenfree. One word. And
like Ollie Ollie.
yeah. And from what I've been told, from what I've seen, it's a great game. And I know very little about it, and it's relatively short. So probably like a session or two, and you're done with it. Unless you replay it and find something else new or interesting about it, which is always fascinating.
You know we're gonna be doing that.
So we're gonna be consuming that for next week. Mac, any final thoughts on Book 2 of Avatar: The Last Airbender?
I'm just excited to get to Book 3 and be able to talk about the show as a whole, and then specifically talk about why Legend of Korra is the worst show that's ever existed.
That's wow.
And you.
I mean, I haven't seen Legend of Korra, but
Okay, that's not true. That's not true. I'm not willing to go that far, but it's pretty fucking
okay. I
garbage.
mean, Book 2 is so much better than Book 1. Book 1 is necessary, but the best thing about Book 2 is the payoff that it serves for Book 1. Easily. It just happens to be that sort of way. The narrative storytelling is a lot better this time around. So, I'd still recommend watching this show. I give yourself a little bit of time between Book 1 and Book 2. That's what I did. Yeah, you're gonna appreciate Book 2 a lot more after you get those first few sort of okay episodes. Once they introduce Toph, things pick up. I can't help but recommend it. All right, Mac, thank you very much, and we'll talk next week.
I'm excited. Thank you.